Всем привет, это проект Альфа.
Hello everybody, this is Project Alpha. My name is Nikolai Feldman. War Diary with Alexey Arestovich is live on air. Hello Alexey. Hi Nikolai. Alright, we were off the previous week. A lot of things happened, so probably will be a rather rich stream today. I want to figure out an answer to the question, who is disrupting the peace deal? We perhaps need to talk about the position of the United States, China, Russia, and Ukraine. It seems that Ukraine occupied the right position first, gave the right pass over to the group, saying that we are okay with a 30-day truce. Russia disagreed to that and started shooting up Ukrainian cities. And Ukraine, in return, started attacking Russia as well. So now the whole fight is reignited again. Do you still believe that the truce will happen? So, okay, in orderly fashion, Nikolai, truce is being disrupted by both sides, Russia and Ukraine. Because if we were not disrupting it, there would be no messages about us coming to Belgorod district, and then, of course, the oil station in Suja all of a sudden starts to catch fire. Of course, we know Russians are blowing up themselves, but really. And Russians are disrupting it, of course, by hitting the energy objects in Ukraine, telling fairy tales about the 7 UAVs that Putin ordered to turn around or shoot down live on air, when in reality they continue the devastation on the Ukraine territory. These are all well-known stories. Online there is a wonderful lecturer, I forgot his name, a specialist on North Korea. He was talking about how during the war between South and North Korea, how it came to an end when South Koreans were screaming about the war to the end with damned communists until the United States basically almost shut down their aid, and the Southerners were completely dependent on that aid. So that kind of what caused the war to end there. And I think that's the phase of Ukrainian-Russian war now that we're looking at. Is it good enough an answer, Nikolai, or do you want to ask more in this regard? I also think Trump is an important piece in this agreement, but I think he's being hated on all sides. Russians are trying to discredit him. Ukrainians apparently do hate him. And we can see that at least through the deal of rare earth minerals, where Zelensky and his cohorts had riled up the whole country against Trump and his agreement. And those people who initially supported this agreement, today they're actually coming out and saying that they're against. Nikolai, indeed, let's pay some attention to the current situation and just be very thorough about it. First of all, let's address why supposedly Trump and Putin are both against our poor Ukrainian project. This is somewhat true. They joined in their stance, but not against Ukraine, but against Ukraine nationalistic project. And this is a very big difference, and until you start seeing this difference, you will not understand it. Now, let's look at the situation inside Ukraine. First of all, Ukrainian propaganda and lack of government strategic communication had done so that that project of Ukrainian Liberation Nationalistic Army dugout became associating itself with, or started associating itself with the whole Ukraine. But why? Why the F? Because this is just one project. Ukraine should not be tied to just one project. Is it a question of self-ID? Well, I can switch to Ukrainian, and Alexey speaks in Ukrainian language, talking about his love to Ukrainian literature, yet still he is against putting a t-shirt with the slogan on the death to our enemies. I do not want to attack people for their beliefs, for the difference of opinion. Now he switches to Russian. I do like literature as well. I like Pushkin, Bulgakov, Dostoevsky, and I don't want to bomb Ukrainian cities for that. I don't need to shoot people for this. I don't need to cut anybody's heads off and execute anybody. Self-ID is very simple. In order to self-identify, I do not need to associate myself with NATO or fight with NATO. I do not need to be part of European Union. And these two self-identifications within me as a Ukrainian and as a Russian culture expat, of somebody who grew up in the USSR, They do not conflict with each other. And I can appreciate both Ukrainian literature and Crime and Punishment in the same book. How does that happen, one can ask, despite both Russian and Ukrainian propaganda? Because I should have been torn apart, right, by both sides within myself. And I can also bring here some American identification, because I do like this country. And all that shows how artificial nationalistic project is in Ukraine. Even Trump and Putin are somewhat siding against it. And look, Putin gave an interesting interview recently. He said that Ukraine needs to conduct elections under United Nations supervision because Zelensky is illegitimate. And he basically voiced whatever he told Trump on the phone in their conversation. And I do not like to bring the insights. I hate it, but I do have the information, some on this. Basically, Putin called Trump and told him that we either figure a way to take down the entire Ukrainian government right now, perhaps with China participation, with the United Nations participation, or I finish them off militarily. We may need 5 more years, according to Putin. Russia may need 5 more years to reach their goals. And he's ready somewhat to continue this war. He still has some resources. While Trump doesn't really have that time. Trump promised to figure it out till the end of April, and after that, he's losing his face. Problem is that Trump doesn't really have a forceful lever against Putin. Not that he cannot strike Russia with nukes and missiles. Of course he can, but this is not the adequate response. And even Putin's Russia is needed more to the United States than Ukraine to fight with China, to have an ally on this continent. And that's his dilemma. He wants to finish this war, but an aggressor is more important for him than, and God forbid me for saying this word, the victim of aggression. And his scope, his opportunity to influence Russia is limited. He's facing a very complex dilemma. How he is trying to find a way out of it. First, he is saying that he is very upset with Putin. I would not want to slap more sanctions or do more stuff against Russia, but Putin is really pissing me off, so I'll probably sanction Russian oil. And that would imply that everybody who buys Russian oil will not be able to deal with the United States. And that is China, Europe, India, and many other countries. Second, he says that he will attack Iran because Iran is horrible. They've been instigating the Houthis and they're avoiding the nuclear deal with the United States. And Iran is taking position that they will not talk about any nuclear deals without a third party, such as Russia or China. And Iran, by the way, is purchasing Russian oil. They've got some interesting relations there. So Trump wants to create an exemplary punishment. The third aircraft carrier group is already coming to the straits there. And perhaps affect Putin this way. But what if Putin doesn't get scared? What then? And, okay, let's consider it a little further. Imagine Trump implemented more sanctions against Putin, but Putin is not budging. What else can they do? Then they need to put all the effort onto Ukraine, because Putin's list of demands is pretty short. And not making it more simple, but basically it's Finlandization of Ukraine. When Finland, after the Second World War, took it upon itself to not propagandize against Soviet Union, to not limit economic relations, to not join any military blocs, and to not conduct anti-Russian activities from their territory. So Putin suggests the same model for Ukraine, a neutral government, neutral country, no NATOs, no EUs. The army is not bigger than 250,000, which is, by the way, a good positive news, because before that, they were only talking about 50 or 90,000. But there is also an attack on the nationalistic symbols of Ukraine, forbidding all the nationalistic battalions in Ukraine, and Russia taking away 4 districts of Ukraine, 4 regions of Ukraine. Otherwise, Russia continues fighting. And the key matter here is not even territory to Russia. It's more about disbanding nationalist battalions and disbanding any symbols related to them. This is a strike right in the heart of Ukrainian nationals. Now, those people who believe that Trump and Putin have joined and that Europe is with them, a question to you guys. Do you really think that multicultural Europe, with open language politics, with open religious agenda, will support you in dismantling monuments, in suppressing religion, and removing certain or limiting certain groups of people? Europe will not be supporting nationalistic project. Ukrainian nationalistic dugout will not be supported by anybody. So Europe is also going to join Trump and technically Putin in order to fight that nationalistic element in Ukraine. And by the way, I am for Ukraine, but I'm against the narrow nationalistic project. Ukraine should not be represented by a single nationalistic project. Me and Ilya Chedalum, a historian, are recording a story about the Ukrainian project. I recommend you all to watch it because even Ukrainian nationalism had 6 or 7 different versions. Oh yeah, that fellow talks really good about that. He knows his subject, Alexey. Right. So these people who are supportive of this nationalist movement, they're absolutely right in their heart, but they completely lack in their brain compartment. And that story that we have got ourselves to self-identify Ukraine with the dugout of nationalism, that dugout will be finished by Putin, by Trump, by Europe, by us jointly. The question is, what next? What are we fighting for? Nobody is fighting for territories. We will not militarily take them back. Nobody is fighting for Crimea. Again, not an option right now militarily. What can we fight for? We can fight to not let Putin continue his war in Ukraine and to prevent future aggression. But we cannot fight for the nationalistic dugout, the one that's trying to sit on all chairs. You cannot at the same time fight the tyranny and say that you are a democracy while also prohibiting the use of certain languages and cultures and religions in the country. I mean, psychologically you can believe in all that, but technically it's impossible. If you will do that, nobody will consider you a democracy. And now everybody technically is against that nationalistic Ukrainian Liberation Army dugout. And now we're observing an experiment whether this dugout can fend itself from everybody. Putin, Trump, and Europe with their garage fabrication of drones and their promises to destroy Russian army in half a year, and that Trump will also deflate soon and will show him how to do it, with all this propaganda that's coming from Zelensky now. And Trump is facing a complex issue he's trying to solve. He'll probably bomb Iran or slap some sanctions on them to get Putin to budge on his positions. Okay, but what next? He did say that Zelensky will face serious consequences for refusal from deal. And that's pretty easy for Trump to implement. What if Zelensky will refuse to follow the guidance of United States? And his ratings are actually growing in Ukraine right now because a bunch of Ukrainian citizens who are agitated and scared by the relentless attacks of Russians and the drones attacking the country, they're hysterically jumping to support Zelensky. I would love to talk to Bukov, another polemist with Russian origins on this topic. But overall, the question can be put like this. We are in a dead end of uncertainty, and nobody knows how to address it in the most effective way. Trump does not have a solution. Trump has limits within which he can operate, and he found those limits pretty quickly. He's in the same situation with Greenland and Canada, but he can figure out those two. With Zelensky, not exactly so. It's more difficult. All right, Alexey, look, I think he already made a decision what to do. We have a publication this week. Washington Post published a secret memorandum from Pentagon about China. That China is the only threat and Taiwan is the only priority, while Europe will need to figure it out with Ukraine, Russia, North Korea, etc. themselves. So if they published it, I think Trump is already preparing the secondary fortification line that he can fall back to. If Russia doesn't want to deal with Trump, if Zelensky doesn't want to deal with Trump, why would he want to stay in this equation by himself? I don't understand that. If he is the only person who wants to freeze this conflict, to give some guarantees of security to Ukraine by signing rare earth minerals deal and starting the mining, he's the only one who wants to agree about Arctic with Russia and figure out some future politics in this regard. So for Russia, this is one of the articles with 500 more sub-articles there. Seems like Russia is collecting all their wants in their big list, all the Putin's wants over his 30 years, to pin them on Trump and ask him to help them achieve all that. But I don't think Trump wants to do that or will do that. I think everything ends in a deadline of meeting with Xi Jinping. I think it will happen a month from now in Washington, roughly, right? Right, plus minus a few days. That's Putin's deadline. If Putin is not going to follow through with the truce, with the deal, then Trump and China will be solving this conflict together in a format of, I guess, G2, right? This is a possible model, Nikolai, but dilemma of Russia is not disappearing. There would not be a Greenland issue if that was not one of the key areas in the North Atlantic, and the area where United States want to make sure they have enough power to resist Russia and China. This is a threat to American national security. Second, the whole strategy is collapsing. The strategy was to use Russia against China as the counterweight to balance out the system. That was the idea in the United States. Now that seems to be falling apart with peace through diplomacy. Nobody is talking about $1 trillion fund because that's connected to the rare earth mineral deal, and reasonably so. So what if Russia will continue some pressure onto Europe, including military measures, which I do not quite believe, but the reality is still there, that they can possibly do that. They can possibly threat European countries. NATO's fifth article. And what to do with NATO? That publication in Washington Post is not a doctrine and not a change of foreign politics, it's just the publication. There are 15 of those daily in the United States, and for $100,000 I can place any publication in Washington Post or the like. Some of the Ukrainian lobbyists became very good specialists, and they've perverted quite a few correspondents. Now, in a lot of articles in the United States and in Europe, you can publish for 100,000 K any article you like. So this is not exactly a good source to rely upon. Yes, indeed, the conflict between Taiwan and China is still smoldering. The agreement behind the scenes was heard to be that Taiwan might eventually be given to China as the zone of influence, but apparently this is not happening because China is not really listening to the United States and not playing nice. So now Trump, Vance, Musk are understanding that the world is more complex than they initially thought. So the valid question is, what next? Okay, you can bomb Iran to smithereens, but what do you do with China and Russia? What will China and Russia do if they understand that that's it, that Trump cannot do anything else? Well, sanctions, yes, but anything else? And the main question here is, what will we do? I think it's obvious what Trump will do with Ukraine. He'll probably make 3 steps back and say, well, you guys then help yourself if you don't want my help here. Right, indeed, Alexey. I think that's what's going to be posed in front of that brave Ukrainian nationalistic dugout. So, more publications. Financial Times, Alexey. Baltic countries are concerned that ceasefire in Ukraine might increase the threat from Russia to them. This is a signal from Europe that do not conclude the war between Russia and Ukraine too rapidly, because Russia might move their efforts against certain countries of Baltic region. Poland also is saying that they can resist Russian aggression probably for 2 weeks. Poland is saying that they have enough resources to protect themselves for 1 or 2 weeks in case of Russian aggression. General Dariusz Szakowski told in one of the publications. So they are not seemingly going to end the war of Russia with Ukraine. European countries are against finishing the war by any means necessary. And they are seemingly supporting Ukraine as the forepost of Europe, and they're trying to support Zelensky and Ukraine as a continuous fighting force against Russia. They will be playing this, right? Oh yeah, they will. But Nikolai, how much did European aid dwindle in the 2 weeks that we haven't seen each other? They started with some hundreds of billions, and today they're what, $2 billion or euros somehow on certain terms. So Europe, I think, caught the same disease from Ukraine. A ton of sweet promises without any backing. Right, absolutely, Alexey. They are enjoying these statements. Ukraine, you are the forepost. You are the forward base. Without you, we cannot go forward. We cannot coexist with Russia without you serving as a buffer. Right, this is exactly, Nikolai, the fairy tales and legends of the Ukrainian nationalistic model. And if that's where they want to go, we cannot really stop them. So President Zelensky, Alexei, seemingly is trying to trade that deal about rare earth minerals. I think it was almost ideal. He should have agreed to that when it was offered, but he disrupted it twice. Nikolai, the problem is not in that. The problem is that American-Ukrainian relations have been disrupted, I think, irreparably. And even that deal would not serve the full scope as it was initially designed to be. And it's not the problem with nationalistic battalions. You can disband them in one day. But the question is that a lot of people in Ukraine seriously believe that nationalistic project is the future of Ukraine, and they align with it. Why Zelensky believes in that, I understand. He never had brains. He might not have read many books on strategy in his life, and he just reacted to the most prominent signal from his electorate, or the loudest one. And I can understand why Ukrainian citizens are going for this because of propaganda and the pain of ongoing fighting. But that's the problem. This solution doesn't have brains. You need to look at the analogies from Korea, from Germany, how all these wars ended. Look at the South Vietnam analogy. But one needs brains to compare. Okay, so we'll fight for a few months without American aid. Let's start with a simple question. How do we fight Russian UAVs with our air defense? Now they got new tactics. They gather in droves around the city. They fly around it in big flocks, and then they pick targets and attack. And Ukrainian side cannot really counter that. We have not discovered how to. Of course, we will figure it out. We'll put some aerostats and some other barriers for them. But finally, bright Russian thought figured out that, 2 years or 3 years into the war, that the first chapter of the book on tactics had a very good kernel of getting the pressure, exerting the pressure on a certain point, amassing a lot of resources in one point. What if they will do that and they'll attack one city, then the other city like that? They'll be crumbling our infrastructure. And now they're pressing against different parts of the front, but they probably will regroup around August to continue later. So how are we going to fight against that? Because it's not just the front. You need energy systems, you need manufacturing, you need moral spirit of nation that is supposedly going to resist while their cities are being demolished by Russian forces. What we will use? The garage manufacturing facilities? Are we capable to assemble a Patriot system in there? Or do you think if you blow more oil refineries in Russia, that'll stop Putin? So the key task of this period is, as I would formulate it, how quickly will we become smart enough to denounce the dugout of Ukrainian Liberation Army nationalistic project? Because this story is about death. This is the dead philosophy that wants to grab more souls with it. And you could notice the moment that ideology became prevailing in Ukraine, our population got a really negative trend. It's dwindling. People are leaving the country. What other proofs do we need in order to justify the statement that this is a dead project? And I want to pose a question in front of our compatriots. Do you want perhaps think about our country being different? There's a different future possible for our country. And let's see what will be the cost for us to take a different perspective. We lose 4 districts, we'll lose nationalistic battalions and don't use some symbols. Okay, but we still have a rather big Ukraine left with access to the sea. What is the alternative? Continue withdrawing to the left bank with our 5 million drones that we somehow advertised? Is that the alternative? So we are facing a very difficult dilemma here by Trump, Putin, Xi Jinping, everybody. I just got back from India. I would tell you that I talked to a couple of Indian, right there, what, tuk-tuks, not taxi drivers, tuk-tuks, right? So they're saying that, Alexey, we of course love Ukraine, but not the nationalistic version of it. Oh, Alexey, India is the whole other civilization for us. Indeed, Nikolai. And the dugout has no allies in this world. It doesn't even have enough allies in Ukraine, but they got a lot of people hostage, and they're forcing them to die for this project. And here is the question, whether Ukrainians will finish off this dugout or the dugout will finish off Ukrainians. That's, I think, the right dilemma for today. And I have only one word for our compatriots: choose. Alexey, I'm afraid they won't choose wisely, because the central signal wants them to not choose, to not make that logical choice. Let's look at the ideological component of that central signal coming from Kiev. What do they say? They're saying unity. Make sure we only speak Ukrainian. And this will be part of our unity. But this is the thesis that doesn't really hold any critique, because even amongst themselves, those people who are marching for this thesis, and they don't have much of any other ideology, they don't even have their own unity. They indeed represent 6 or 7 different projects which actually hate each other. Do we not know that supporters of Poroshenko hate the supporters of Zelensky? This is truth. And those who side with Beletsky, they hate both Poroshenko and Zelensky groups. This is also true. We know that. This is not a surprise to anybody. But they all are suppressing other people in Ukraine with the same propaganda style. And there is no other official ideology that would be openly accepted. And President Zelensky seems to be able, he thinks he's able to use that to trade things with Trump. And I'm under opinion that Zelensky is trying to pressure Trump. Putin is trying to pressure Zelensky, and Zelensky is trying to pressure Trump. I think this is schizophrenia, but that's how I see it. Let's again address it in the orderly fashion, Nikolai. We saw a couple of statements by Goncharenko and Nesterenko. They both are bright representatives of that stinky dugout, but they're already fighting with each other. They're squabbling even before any election. Remember, I told on some streams back that they will be fighting for those 30% of electorate that support them. And I want to say one more thing to our Ukrainians. Guys, unity is for dumb Fs. This is for really stupid ones. The first argument is that unity cannot be achieved by an appeal. However much you appeal to that, unity doesn't evolve like this. Unity is not an emotion. Unity is not agreement to do that for now. Unity is the result of something lived jointly, some experience that everybody shares. But if the project is separating Ukrainians into different groups, there is no unity. The project that doesn't include everybody cannot be a unifying project. When somebody says we need to unite, you can only translate that from psychological, that I don't know what to do, but at least let's hold together so it's not too scary. And let's listen to me. Right, Nikolai, this is not a position. This is fear. Vote for me because I scream about unity. Fear has never united anybody. Fear is dispelling. Second, unity is masking the fear of conflict. If you note, I never talk about unity. I often talk about being that separation point. Who's not with us, he's against us. And quoting one of the Middle East extremists, and his publication about 2,000 years old, who's saying who had chosen his family instead of me is against us. So we need to rattle the boat. This boat is stinky and rotten, and we're about to sink in it. The boat needs to capsize, and only the real Ukraine needs to survive. The real appeal is not unity. The real appeal is to set the whole thing on fire from all four sides and see what remains. That will be the alive one. The third argument is that unity comes after truth and not instead of truth. As long as we're not saying any truth, there'll be no unity. And people who are stating the truth, they're defining that unifying field way better than those who lie a lot. Because unity as a lie doesn't really work. But it's a very strong idea now in Ukraine. Let's not argue. We have one country, one pain, one soul. And both Russian-speaking and Ukrainian-speaking are facing Shahid attacks at night, and then at some other time of the day, one side is yelling at the other for listening to some music in Russian. That's not unity. Purity facilitates unity. Clear agenda facilitates unity. Appeals to unity is manipulation. If you decipher it, you will find that it means vote for us, otherwise we're very afraid. Do not attack Ukrainian jackets. Do not attack us for our receipts, how we spend the donations and support money. Let's be united. Let's not point fingers at each other. Let's not talk about corruption. We gotta be united. But normal, strong people, they see that these falsities, they feel them, and they don't want to join with that appeal. After coming back from spiritually clean India, I am looking at what's happening in Ukraine, and the moment I hear unity, I am experiencing disgust. How can we join with this group of people? And if Trump and Putin, and if we would not do that, if we do not denounce this nationalistic narrow project, then Trump and Putin will do that, will finish it off. And they'll be supporting Europe, and China will turn away, they wouldn't care. There is no shape, there is no truth behind these appeals to fake unity. It will not work. We either figure it out how to deal with that dugout, or it will carry us to our graves. So the question is whether we'll find the right political leader in the country, and whether Ukrainians will have enough balls to support that person, and to be strong enough to amputate the part of Ukraine that we cannot return right now, perhaps temporarily, like Germany did, like Korea did, like Azerbaijan did, and start new project of Ukraine. Understand the very simple thing here. In the current situation, you and us, whether Democrats come back, whether China has some capitalist revolution at some point, whether Russia changes leadership and somebody like Navalny starts to lead it, we will not be able to do anything about this dugout if we don't solve it. It'll still take us to our graves. The only way out for now is to amputate those districts and the nationalist project and figure out where to go with new Ukraine. And until Ukrainians figure out that this is the only viable exit out of this situation, they'll be paying with their future, with their lives, with their relatives, for attempt to avoid reality. That's how I see all this agenda. And I keep watching these propaganda in Ukraine, all different bloggers and experts coming out and all kinds of media attacking Putin and Trump. It's not even analysis anymore. It's just very nervous appeal. It seems like they're using some sorcery and trying to enchant it by repeating certain statements over and over again, that they would get, I don't know, Magic Johnson visit in the helicopter with support from UK and EU with money and weapons. So even those who figure out any analytics in Ukraine, they very often figure out that they caught not Trump, but themselves. They caught themselves on corruption and many other issues that we have. And that's why to all those who favor conspirology, anti-Trump, anti-Xi Jinping conspirology, I give a very simple way to save themselves from conspirology. 30 seconds of a seminar. The real explanation that contains truth is usually not likable, not liked by a person. And the explanation that is liked is usually not true. And whatever scenario you have in your head that tells you that people need to behave themselves as you them want to, this is a weak scenario because you're missing from it. You do not have your responsibility and your actions. This is not a scenario, this is a kid's drawing on the wallpaper. And the moment Trump states something else, and he likes making statements, we usually take down the previous drawing from the wall and we start drawing another kid's drawing on this wall. This is not analytics. This is not a strong position. This is a panicky defense. And when you travel the world and visit those shrines in India, you can see from afar how that inner Ukraine propaganda becomes so primitive. That's what I'm telling to all these bloggers. Continue writing about financial crash of Russia, about how much Elon Musk has lost, about European support and the garage military-industrial complex of Ukraine, and that you will be able to do everything you want yourselves without any support. And the main problem is that all these singers of this dugout who think that they sing for Ukraine and those who support them, they very often believe that they can enchant the world with words. That if they just repeat the words much enough, the world will change. It won't. It's not even analysis what you see from there. It's a ritual. Go every day to Facebook and write something about bad Trump and that Russia is about to collapse and Ukraine is about to prevail. These people are not looking for truth. They're looking for a way to not see truth, to not acknowledge the real facts. And they're screaming to not notice how much they're afraid. And the weaker the understanding of real processes in the world, in this group, and their responsibility, where they got the country to, the more conspiracy theories you see, the weaker they present Trump. It's a funny mix of both treacherous and weak. It's the same story they use about him as they did about Putin before, when they accused Putin of being an old senile gramps hiding in a bunker, but at the same time also a demonic figure that is destroying the world. So how do they make these two ideas live in their head about Trump? That Trump is an enemy who betrayed Ukraine, at the same time with appeals to Trump to strike Russia with nukes and save Ukraine. And that's why I think, Nikolai, that whole Ukrainian story is about very weak and sick people that are representing the country now. When you observe Ukrainians overseas in different countries, they're not weak. They're smart. They're figuring things out. Look at the Polish economy. Poles are complaining about Ukrainian business aggression, and it's not an aggression. It's norm for Ukrainians. They're made weak by the dugout. The nationalism is the thing that kills them. And we are at the point of choosing the projects. And Trump and Putin tend to be on the side of against the nationalistic project. But do not forget that neither India, nor China, nor Europe will support that dugout. This is the norm in which human society is living since 1945. If you want to play arcade games, you don't really have other options. Why that project still exists? Why is that the only project that prevails in Ukraine? Because it was Bogdan Khmelnytsky's society of the 17th century that had the lords and the serfs. And the serfs are dying these days in the groves, fighting on the front, while the lords are resting in Monaco. And that system cannot birth any good project. It's not even about ideology, it's about also changing the way we interact societally. Because however you change ideology, if you maintain the same relations, it'll birth the same ideology. If you separate your country into lords and serfs, well, you have very limited options. And whenever there is a outer external threat, that system looks appealing. And of course, Russia is right here next door, so they keep that system. And I think the only way for us is to re-establish the governance, re-establish the country, amputate all the occupied territories just because we cannot do anything about it, draw the clear border, and take Trump's plan, or perhaps international coalition in the framework of United Nations, and start building a new project in Ukraine where Ukrainian Liberation Army will probably be an exhibit in a museum. Otherwise, the country will die. Perhaps not everybody, but till Dnieper, at least. Putin is bluffing. In the tempo of that warfare, it'll take him another 3 years probably to get to the river, but without American aid, it may speed up, and there is no other exit. And now, who brought us to this state? Putin? Indian? Tucker? Damned Musk? No, we ourselves brought ourselves here and are refusing to acknowledge it. And that means that the road out so far is through the cemetery. Do you really want to tie yourself to the dead ideology? Do you think that if somebody wrote Ukraine on some dead entity, that is Ukraine? No, Ukraine is much bigger and has much more perspectives than this entity. However many Ukrainian flags do you stick into this thing that is rotting, it's not going to be that Ukraine of the future. Yeah, that's it, Alexey. Look, the only person who can affect that internally is probably President Zelensky. All these words, he needs to hear them. He needs to really understand them. Not just listen to them, but hear it in his mind, in his brain. In his where, Nikolai? I'm afraid he's missing this organ. Nikolai, you're using words that, or in that dugout. Reason is verboten. The nationalistic side of Ukraine is about pathos, is about emotions. It's not about reason. Lomani, he's a very Western Ukrainian fella of a classic type. Read some of his recent posts, how this narrow project is throwing native Ukrainians, scientists who made huge advancements in mathematics, in physics, in medicine, who are getting evicted out of the country. And by the way, there was another publication recently that tracked that Ukraine is experiencing the fastest decline of scientists per capita among all the countries in the world. With all the respect to Burkina Faso, we have less scientists now. So that's why I'm saying this narrow project for Ukraine is a dead project. And the main bet that they keep making there, the main thing that drives them is that empty emotional appeal that doesn't have anything behind it, just an emotion, pathos. The human can operate in pathos, ethos, and logos. Russia is definitely about logos. They're very unethical, but they're very logical. Ukraine and Russia both suffer in terms of ethics. Americans are logical but ethical in most times. And this project that Ukraine is betting on now is just pathos. Listen to official statements. 5 million drones. That's our politics? That's the conversation of responsible people? Is that strategic communication? We'll assemble 5 million of UAVs in our garages? Guys, in 1991, this country had the second largest aerial military group in the world, the biggest air defense systems cluster in Europe. And now, what also happened this week, what also indicates rather well what happened, what is happening. One of the Trump's aides came out and said that all the Ukrainian nukes were Russian nukes, right? This is stupid. But the fact that Ukrainian dugout, as a response, started moving and started screaming that, wait, this is a joint produced weapon. We produced it together in the Soviet Union, Russia and Ukraine and other republics. But wait a second. Aren't you the ones who are screaming that you were an oppressed colony? That you were an oppressed territory in the Soviet Union or under Russia? Show me anywhere in the world where a colony had nukes. where oppressed territory had nukes. And you've been screaming about that, and at the same time you're also screaming about a colonial agreement, that this is neo-colonialism. Do you think Soviet Union enforced any rare earth element agreements onto Ukraine? Right? Giggles in the studio. Where was it a colony? And then Alexey made a great statement. However you name your yacht, this is how it's going to sail. You've been screaming about colony for so long that you managed to become a colony, which you never have been in the first place. This is just the ideology of the dugout. This is not about rationale. These people are not even seeing the logical statements of their historical screams when they're chasing their own tails. We've been a colony, but we had nukes and it's ours. Right? Well, Alexei, India could have said something here that they've been a colony of Britain, and Britain does have nukes, right? And India has nukes too, but India made its own nukes. Oh, they made their own. They did not, yeah, no, so they did not demand it from Britain. Right, Nikolai, they did not. They, unlike China that copied Russian aeronautics space program, India decided that they'll be slower, but they built their own, and they built it up from the bolt. And the longer I observe them, the more I like their path. Here in Ukraine, we're screaming about nukes that we will rebuild somehow, and we have some foggy statements about Zhytomyr project. But guys, this rhetoric looks very specific from the outside. This is the rhetoric of 10-year-old guys who are jumping above the fence and saying, hey, you, maybe not even 10-year-old, 6-year-old, who's jumping on the trampoline behind the fence and saying, my dad will come out and kick your butt. Where do these ideas about conducting elections in Ukraine under United Nations guidance come from? They come from the world observing our rhetoric, what we're doing here. They're saying that you guys are all nuts. We're seeing what you're doing, not because you're resisting Putin. We all do resist Putin. But the level of your rhetoric, the level of the vocabulary you use, how you connect things together, you cannot be considered as a serious country. The country that says that they'll produce in the garage 5 million UAVs, that they're building some nukes in Zhytomyr. This is how world powers position themselves? Are you sure? That actually creates an urge with some people to call some medical brigade and take the whole territory of Ukraine under the protection of the United Nations or something. Unfortunately, I understand that this is the current image, current brand of Ukraine out there. We are not, our citizens are not all like that. But our speed of decline is definitely exceeding the speed of issues that Tesla is having based on Musk's recent operations. Yet in Ukraine, they're screaming about Musk and they're refusing to observe how quickly their own stock is falling down. They're planning to have any support from Ukraine, from Europe. Europe will not be able to support you because their main logic is the longer Ukraine resists, the better Europe will be able to speed up their military-industrial complex. And they will speed it up, but at the cost of lives of Ukrainian kids. Are you sure that's how you want to proceed? Make a choice. Alexei, when you say make a choice, it's one person who needs to make it, I think. Nikolai, not so much. It's about a couple million people who are supportive of Zelensky now, who are mixing the dugout with the Ukraine. What can these people do, Alexei, in your view? Well, they can stop supporting Zelensky. How? How do you mean? Very simply, when Zelensky ratings will be 0 with his rhetoric. This is when United Nations project will be much closer to be implemented. Or peace treaty, much closer to be implemented. If we stop supporting that narrow project dugout, we will stop a bunch of inner conflicts. Nobody will be attacking people who are listening to some music in Russian. This is not a problem in Zelensky. This is not a problem with nukes. This is the problem that Ukrainians are ready to fight each other and strangle their neighbor because they do not express certain support to the position taken by Zelensky. Because there are people believing in Ukrainian narrow project, nationalistic project, and they want everybody to be uniform, supportive of them. And there are some people who voluntarily support this project, and they're trying to smash everybody else's head with this project. This is not exactly Zelensky rating even. This is about the rating of Ukrainians in regards to each other. Ukrainians are not united, they are split. This is a very split society. How are you going to resist anybody in these conditions? Alexey, two central signals coming at the same time. President Poroshenko was doing exactly the same. President Zelensky, standing at the stadium, was saying, and he basically turned into Poroshenko in the worst version of him. Right, he turned into Poroshenko. Poroshenko at least did not betray anyone. He just invented that army, speech, and faith ideologically, and he drifted from his position where he started. He is the founder of the Regions Party. He was the cleric of the Moscow Patriarchy Church, and he drifted to that national version of Ukraine, nationalistic version of Ukraine. Zelensky drifted way further from his original position. Do not forget about Ukrainians overseas or just abroad, outside of the country, who do not want to come back. When Madar, the commander of the UAV brigade, comes out and says in his interview that when the war will be over, I'll take my family and leave this country in 3 days. What is that about? Oh, Alexey, this is exactly about that thing, that the war should not be stopped. This is what Zelensky is doing. We are the forepost of Europe, and we need to be continuously fighting. Right, look, this is not Arestovich who is saying that you need to leave Ukraine. Arestovich says you need to come back and build a new country. My dad, one of the symbolic figures of this war, is saying the opposite. A successful detachment, speaking Ukrainian, shooting down Russian UAVs, using our technology. Arestovich in Russian is saying that you need to come back to Ukraine and make a new country, while Madar, on a very beautiful Ukrainian, says you gotta leave this country as far as you can see. This is the cost of the nationalistic project. This is not Zelensky project, this is the philosophy project. And those people who are supportive of it, that very loud third, ideologically charged 30% of the country and is being supported by the government as the main project of Ukraine, that project needs to be liquidated. It needs to live at the ideological garbage can in the museum somewhere. And 2/3 of people who are being taken hostage, they either fail to recognize that or they are afraid to go against it. And they probably would, if not the government authority pressing them in a different way, which they're doing, and they're continuing with the propaganda to preserve their own power. This is how that scheme works. This is not just Zelensky or Poroshenko fault. Instead of building the normal country, they figured out this deadly niche of a deadly ideological project for Ukraine. But it unfortunately continues to support them. And the exit here, it's either Trump or Putin that will remove them, or we will have to do it. And as long as you're not formed well, you cannot be treated by partners in the international arena seriously. Because that's our main problem, because the moment they try to rely on you, you will dissipate. If they want to amputate certain regions, we need to make sure we do that ourselves. If we would come out and said, okay, to hell with you Russians, take these 4 territories, but let's organize free movement of services, goods, and people, of Ukrainian citizens, and this is all possibly organizable if we would go for that deal. Because otherwise they'll still enforce it upon us, either within the 4 districts that they mentioned, or perhaps in 6, if they continue fighting and capture a couple more. If we would go for what Finland did after the Second World War, and would have said, okay, we accept these terms, we would have gotten a chance to reset the project, to build a better Ukraine, to build a different Ukraine. It would still be one of the biggest countries in Europe with a huge potential. But we would have removed that poisoning antivitamin, that poisoning chemical from our body, and we could have gotten a better world than before the war. Yes, missing some territories, but again, free Ukraine with new potential. And this is the only option that we have, because 6 months later, they'll be talking about 6 districts, then about 7. And we'll still come to that point, but just with bigger losses, in the same fashion as it was back in 22. This week, there are a lot of publications that there was a conflict between Milley and Zelensky, that one attacked the other. We had this situation before, right? Back in 22, we failed to use that situation when the Russian army was at the bottom. Russian ideology was scraping the bottom. When after their defeat in Kherson district and when HIMARS started working on the front, they understood what will happen on the front if the West will be serious about supporting Ukraine. When they lost a lot of forward operating bases and command officers, we had a great chance to stop the war then. We conducted counteroffensive and political goals. It was very poorly organized, and that was a very breaking point for us. And since then, we have not become smarter. But then, we had 7% of territory occupied, something like that. Today, it's 15. And we're repeating the same mistake. Today, we will get a lot of support if we agree to that. Tomorrow, there probably will be no support. The second time when you step on this rake, it is not the fault of the rake, it's the fault of a human. As somebody said, if you're a 30-year-old and you're buying cakes with shit, it's not the seller's fault, it's your fault. That's it. End of the first hour.